How did a single Bible translation, the NIV, make a publisher $65 million a year? Well, this week we're going to be talking to Paul Caminiti, a good friend of mine. He used to be the Bible publisher for Zondervan Publishing, which became part of Harper One, which was owned by a New York City publisher. And we talk about all the ins and outs of bringing translations to bear, actually creating the Bible, all the different types of Bibles. If you've ever wondered why there's a little girl's Bible, a tween girl's Bible, a teenage girl's Bible, and a corresponding one for the boys, and a hunter's Bible, Jesus and Politics Bible. He talks about where those come from and what's the thinking behind them, and it's mostly economic. And then we talk about what are better ways to publish Bibles rather than worse ones. This is all insider information, stuff you can only hear from somebody who was there, and all of the controversies that happened with the NIV translation and the today's NIV translation. He talks about all of that. If you like what you're seeing or hearing, you can like and subscribe to our YouTube channel or subscribe to our podcast channel. And if you want to give to the Center for Hebraic Thought, you can at thebiblicalmind.org/give. I got to get that one right. Just a note for this episode that even though Paul and I were only 30 miles apart, we had a significant delay in the line, so I'm talking all over him, worse than usual, so please bear with me. It wasn't my fault.
This is the Biblical Mind Podcast, produced by the Center for Hebraic Thought. Honest 5-star reviews help others find this podcast. Visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org for articles and videos that explore the deep structures of Scripture.
So I do have a somewhat lengthy career in the Bible publishing industry. I pastored for about 12 years and then had a 10-year hiatus in business and ended up after that going to Zondervan and being invited to be the Bible publisher. And, it was a fascinating experience. To be very frank, I knew more about the Bible than I did about publishing at that point, and even the publishing industry. The person who had hired me liked that I thought freshly and about the Bible, and so I was hired. But the surprising thing for me, first of all, when I took the position, it was Zondervan was far and away, the largest Bible publisher in the world by about a factor of 3. I was shocked to find out that we were selling about 7 million Bibles a year. It was about a $65 million a year business. Because HarperCollins was owned by New York. Another surprise was that I did get a message from New York telling me that if I screwed up, that my tenure as a Bible publisher, would be short-lived. And
maybe we could put some details in there, because I think even at this point, people are already thinking, "Wait, what? That many millions of Bibles, why would a big New York publisher be worried about little old you?" I mean, I think that's how we think of it, is like, oh, there's a little Bible department in these big publishing houses. Why would they be worried about you and telling you not to screw this up?
Yeah, well, some of it had to do with timing. This was about 2002, and it was when stores like Costco and Walmart and others had discovered that there was lots of money to be made in selling Bibles. So, it's not complicated. It's a numbers game. If you sell a $30 book, the margin is going to be X. But if you're selling, a $50 Bible, or higher quality one, there's a lot more margin. And so in many Christian publishers that do Bibles, the Bible is kind of the cash cow, and it's what keeps the company afloat, in many ways. Book publishing is very dicey business. You pay a person a royalty. The book doesn't do well, and so there's a lot of eating of losses, if you will, within that sector. But in Bibles, there's a lot of money to be made, and New York understood that.
So this is a steady, it almost becomes a passive income for them because they don't have to pay new authors. They're really just retypesetting it and repackaging the Bible in different ways. We're saying the Bible, but what do we mean when we say the Bible as like what translation? Who owns these translations? How do you license the Bible? How does all this work?
Yeah. Right. Well, Zondervan has the exclusive publishing rights to the NIV. And there is kind of a fascinating story behind that. I won't go into all the details, but at that time when there were a number of Christian organizations that felt like, boy, we are due for a new and a fresh, translation. A lot of people were reading, the evangelicals were reading the NASB, and Mainline was still reading, the RSV and the likes. But there was a gathering in Chicago amongst Bible publishers and Bible associations to talk about the possibility of a new translation. And it kind of went out for bid, if you will. And again, the NIV it would be a huge risk. I mean, the idea of creating a translation with hundreds of not just, scholars, but linguists, people who are trained in going from one language to another. But at the end of the day, there was a small Bible organization called Biblica now, and used to be the International Bible Society, and they raised their hand to do this. And so they got started on it, and about halfway through the process, they ran out of money. And they had not estimated what the tower would cost to build. And at that point, the two Zondervan brothers, at this time, Zondervan is still a family-owned business. They had a heart for the NIV. They had a heart for the Bible, and they believed that we were at a point where we really did need a fresh translation. And so I think they both mortgaged their houses.
Wow.
And they ended up, what they did, the agreement was very interesting. They said, give us the exclusive publishing rights for the NIV, and we're still going to pay you a royalty for every copy that we sold. So, it was wonderful in many ways. It was a win-win situation. And so Zondervan and the Zondervan brothers started down that road. And again, they ran out of cash very quickly. And so they ended up going public. So a lot of people ask that, how come these Christian publishers are selling out, to the big New York publishers? Well, in this particular situation, it was simply that they needed the funding, to be able to finish the NIV. And of course, it turned out to be a huge success story. And, the NIV rose very quickly, and for many decades now has been, far and away the leading English translation, in the world.
You may or may not know that you actually have a chance to get this book. In fact, the only way you can get this book is by becoming a recurring donor for $20 a month or more. Feel free to give more if you want. But for $20 a month or more as a recurring donor, you get this book on prophecy and poetry. This is our second book in the series. It's the only way you can get this book. Is by becoming a recurring donor, and it's got essays from scholars who have contributed to the Center for Hebraic Thought and the Biblical Mind before, from Michelle Knight, an Old Testament scholar we love dearly, Beth Stovell, and then also people like Michael Lefebvre or Malcolm Geit. Again, if you want it, you do have to subscribe, so you have to go to thebiblicalmind.org/give and look for the recurring donor link, and we will send one of these to you in the mail. Yeah, so you say they ran out of money twice, and then they got an influx of cash through a New York publisher. What are they spending all their money on? And when we talk about producing a translation, what costs so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think the major cost is hiring the linguists to do this, and I, as the Bible publisher, was invited every year when the Committee on Bible Translation, which was the group of linguists that had been brought together by Zondervan and by the International Bible Society, to every year review where we are with the translation. And part of the covenant for the translation is that it would be evergreen. And this was baked into the contract. And so during, any given calendar year, there are other scholars from a multiplicity of places that will stumble onto something about how a word was used at that particular period in the ancient world, and they'll send that then to that team that meets for a week every summer. And so I was invited to sit in on those meetings. I was on the outer perimeter, but it was a fascinating situation, and I still remember conversations that went 45 minutes about where a comma was going to go.
Yeah.
And so, thankfully, these are very serious people with a very serious mission, and they take it seriously, and it takes a lot of time, to do that.
Yeah. It's funny you say all of this, and I do not, maybe I have the wrong impression, but my impression is that most people don't think of the NIV as this really scholarly Bible. They think of it as this kind of like, oh, this one's easy. This is easy to read. And almost the implication is it must have been easy to translate as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that opens up, the whole other discussion about how we, measure translations, and you can go to some bookstores and they actually have a scale for you. And, on one side of the continuum, is word for word, and on the other side is thought for thought. And they use, different language for that. And and so I think the kind of the conventional wisdom is that people that are serious about the Bible, they're going to go for the word for word translation.
Right.
Christian light, you're very happy, with something that has, that you're not going to find propitiation, in that.
Right.
In that translation.
Which I'm kind of a fan of not having that one in there.
Yeah. But, I mean, in many ways, that is a very reductionistic approach, though, to, Bible translations that are serious. And I still remember one of the scholars, Dr. Mark Strauss, who I think was at Bethel, would give a talk on Bible translations. And he used an example. I hope I can get this right. But he said, take, for example, the Spanish phrase, como se llama? 3 words. And so suppose you were at some sort of a party somewhere, and there were a lot of Latinos there, and you would go up to them and you would say, "Como se llama?" But they obviously would know what that meant. But if you translated that word for word, it's something like "how you call,"
Yeah. How
right?
are you called? Or something
How
like
you?
that.
Yeah, right. So that's not a very good translation, but it is a word for word, translation. And, so if we wanted to make some comparisons, like, so the NASB version, um, would be, how do you call yourself? They might add that next word for the
Mm.
sake of clarity. But really, the best translation is, what is your name, right? And so, I mean, that is not a word for word translation. So in that situation, the word for word translation is not only clunky, but it's not understandable. And moving to the English language, it actually is just kind of garbled. And so I would argue then that in this situation, the thought for thought translation is not only the best translation, but also the most accurate translation.
Hmm.
Would you
I would
agree?
quibble hard with you there.
I'm talking to a scholar here, and oh no, he's going to quibble with me.
Yeah.
I should have stayed in my lane.
No, I get it. I mean, I don't think there is one, like people say, well, what's the best translation? I go, there's lots of great translations out there. I think having the thought for thought in the inner circle of ones that you want to always refer to will give you the best scholarly opinion on kind of what they thought it meant in that culture at that time and how we translate that over to our culture. But even on the word for word one, I mean, we could, even if you say word for word, it's actually never anywhere near word for word. And
Right.
B, it's not order for order, right? So one of the things that most people will point out about Hebrew prose, and certainly poetry, it would be true as well, is that they often fronted certain words in order to show emphasis. So they put verb subject out of order a little bit, so you could, almost like if you were alliterating 5 sentences all with the same, first word or something like that. And also, like, English just doesn't work the same as any of these these Semitic languages or Greek. And so, Greek, you can famously kind of put words in lots of different combinations, but you can figure out what the order is by the way the word is formed. Where for English, word order is absolutely paramount to understanding what is being communicated. So we have a very stratified language in a particular word order stratification. So I still think there's got to be a Bible out there to be translated where they really do kind of try to show you what would be considered the brutal ugliness of a word for word translation. So you can kind of see what's going on, but that wouldn't be the one you read, right? And it certainly wouldn't be the one you like casually read to try and understand what's going on.
Right. And that world better than I do. I think what Mark Strauss was trying to communicate, especially to a group of lay people, many of them who probably thought, why can't we just get a computer to do this, right?
Right.
If we're going to do
With
word
AI
for
right
word.
now, that's the question.
Yeah, exactly. But I think he was pushing back on the idea in general, that that the word for word translation is for the grown-ups. And the NIV and like the NLT and Bibles like that were just kind of loosey-goosey. And that's not the case.
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, just as somebody who's written some books both on the technical and the more popular side, I find that writing to the popular audience is the hard Like, it is really hard to write things so that they are broadly understood by a wide, when I'm writing hyper technical, nerdy stuff, it's not hard to write it because everybody who's reading it basically understands what you're talking about, and you're just trying to point them to some facts of the case. And so I'm always very impressed with scholars who can translate their work to a more broad audience, and I feel like the NIV is doing that task with the biblical literature. It's translating it as best as you can to a broad, mainly American English-speaking audience. I take it that the target audience was Americans. Is that correct?
No, it was actually English speakers and readers all over the world. Thus, the international version, right?
Yeah. That would be the I in the NIV. Actually, now that you say that out loud, that makes a lot of sense. But it adds a whole layer onto, well, does this make sense in Kenyan English, right, versus Canadian English? So it's even a harder task at that point.
Right. So I was, what made this most interesting and frankly painful for me, though, was that I was the Bible publisher during the Bible Wars. And so if you remember the NIV, which actually has like a sister translation for a British translation, they launched a new translation that did try to represent, pronouns in a proper way. So all of this came, by the way, people don't know the kind of story that's behind it, but I used to get like letters from people who were working with Campus Crusade in the Arab world somewhere, teaching English as a second language. And they would, send me letters like, hey, Mr. Caminiti, sorry, but we can no longer use your translation because it's confusing. And so we're helping a student read a verse like, if any man come after me and take up his cross and follow me, etc., I will make you fishers of men. They take that quite literally. And so they say, well, Christianity is a lot like our religion, that men have a place of priority. And so, sorry, but we can't use your translation anymore. And then, on the college university scene then too, if you used a pronoun like that improperly, you would get a big red X by that, and your grade would reflect that you were insensitive. So all of that was going on. And, at that time, due to pressure from certain groups within the United States that were trying to make sure that we held on to biblical manhood and womanhood. I won't name the name of the group, but at any rate,
were these denominational groups? I can almost imagine a center where that would
right. Yeah. And there was one in Colorado Springs, and basically they had a lot of clout and a lot of power. And they came to Zondervan, and they came to the International Bible Society and said, if you do that, if you play fast and loose with the pronouns, then we'll deep six you. And so just so
for all the kids
aware,
out there, that means they'll sink you.
That would write to us and say, my daughter the other day after church came up to me and said, Daddy, why does God like little boys and not little girls? I mean, these were real things that were happening. And so if any of you remember the history, we kind of did an end around, and we published something called the TNIV, which was today's New International Version. And And so it was for a younger audience, but we said we'll leave the 1984 NIV intact, and we won't mess with that. First of all, that was a marketing nightmare to
Oh, I
market
can imagine.
both of those translations and not say that one of them was better, than the other, or even more accurate than the other. And it was we went through a very fascinating experience, and I think I have time to tell it if I can
Yeah, please.
truncate it. So when we published the TNIV, again, we positioned it as um, a translation for the younger audience. So truth for a younger audience. And so we said, let's actually put our money where our mouth is, and let's market it in places where those young people, hang out. And so we did a ad in Modern Bride magazine, and we did one on MTV, and we did one on Rolling Stone. And so we had contracts
Wow.
with those. Yeah. And so, lo and behold, so that story uh, got on the radar of a young journalist at USA Today, and she was fascinated by that this overtly Christian organization publishing a Bible was going to have an ad in Rolling Stone. So, and it would say timeless truth for today's generation. And so she wanted to interview me. And so I had an interview with her. It was terrific. She was just fascinated. And so that story was going to come out in about 3 days. Well, the day before the story was going to before the Rolling Stone magazine was going to come out, and our PR firm got a call from Rolling Stone saying, "Hey, we've changed our mind about the ad." And, it was a shock. And so the question was, well, why? And they said, well, you talk about timeless truth. We try not to take any one religion and put it into a place where we would say, this is true, right? Well, of course, it was a lame excuse. But then our PR firm had to quickly call the journalist at USA Today and say, "Hey, hold the presses," because Rolling Stone just changed,
which makes it a better story at that point.
oh, and this gal, she was furious. She was furious that Rolling Stone, that boasts about being broad-minded and etc. She says, "Oh, we're going to write a story, all right," and and she did, and it was on the front page, and and I mean, I was driving to work, that day, and my wife calls me and says, "Hey, we just got a call from the Dallas Morning News." Oh, wait a minute. Here's another call. And, by the end of the day, we had interviewed with dozens of leading newspapers. And then you'll like this one, and this is going to date me too. We got a call from Fox News, and they had a show back at that time called Hannity and Combs. And for those of your viewers who are under 40 or something like that, Hannity was the conservative and Combs was the token liberal, and those two guys would get on, and sharpen their wits, with each other every night. And so they asked if I would be a live guest on their show that night. And, it was really remarkable. And kind of towards the end of the show, they both kind of looked at each other and said, this is the first time that we've ever agreed on something.
Hmm.
And
They both thought it was the wrong move,
and
I assume.
we thought it was the wrong move. So, Drew, what was really remarkable, and I believe to this day that it was providential, that then, like 4 or 5 days later, when the TNIV actually released these other organizations that were loaded for bear, that were wanting to, have newspapers talk about how this money grubbing company, is being unfaithful to the Bible and what have you. And so when they made those calls, all of the major networks, all of, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they all said, we did that story 2 days ago. And it was
Okay.
the story that had happened because of USA Today. So that was, it was really surreal, in many ways.
Yeah, I
And
think a lot of
I did
people
feel
are
like it was
going
God's
to.
protection.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, we have a little delay, so that's why we keep stepping on each other here. I mean, I think most people are going to hear that and say, why are people fighting over the Bible? And again, I can understand Rolling Stone. Like, I can get in my head in like an editorial room at Rolling Stone, and they think that makes perfect sense. Like, we don't want to vie for any particular view of truth, and I can see how they can justify that in their own world. But you gave us some tidbits, some insider baseball that you kind of scooped over politely. But Christian organizations coming after Bible publishers with real I assume they were not veiled threats; they were just direct, real threats that we'll put an end to this. I mean, I know you don't think that's appropriate behavior, but step out of your shoes for a second. Do you think that that's justifiable for someone who's worried about the word of God being, misconstrued or contorted in some way? By the way, I would also say, like, most of these are where it says something like, brothers, then you shall do this, or, and you're saying brothers and sisters, right? That was a lot of it, which if you were in church in a Sunday school class with kids and they said, why does it say brothers? And you would just say, oh, it means brothers and sisters, of course, right? Like, so it's not like you're doing anything that any pastor wouldn't be doing as they explained it, right? So
Right.
why is it right for them to come after you in some way? Like, is that a justifiable move?
Well, and I think you can probably speak to this, Drew. There's another factor here that linguists understand fully that I don't, and that is that in other languages, there are, feminine connotations and masculine connotations that have nothing to do with male or female, right? So, Spanish table is maybe feminine or something like that.
Right.
In Spanish, a ballpoint pen is masculine. And since we don't have those same dynamics in the English language, people don't understand that when you're translating, you may, come across a word that technically in that particular, language is female, and it has nothing to do with gender. So how do you explain that to lay people, though, right? I mean, this just is going to go right over their head. And that's why I thought, again, the simple example of the como se llama was really useful in explaining that to people. Yeah, it was unbelievable. At times it was cruel. I mean, someone shaking their finger in your face and say, I fear for the damnation of your soul and the soul of every person, at Zondervan. And I still remember being really snarky and said, even the guys in the warehouse, I mean, you can.
That's what I love about you, Paul. A
I
well
do
placed
come
snark,
from
or some
I do
proverb
come
about a
from
well placed snark.
I do come from Italian roots, where many things are settled in a back alley.
Yeah, and it's so, I feel like it's a really lazy move to go hyper fundamentalist and say you're monkeying with the Word of God, and therefore, and I think there are maybe some examples. None of these would convince anybody, like every single layperson, but if I'm in a room full of people and I say, "Hey guys, listen up," right? We're using guys there obviously to address everybody in the room, right? Or we used to talk about ships and nations as she's, right? Israel will get her recompense or something like that, right? So we have this kind of baked, as they say, we do have gender in English. It's just so washed over that we don't really use it anymore. And it is, this is just a free flowing thought, but it is fascinating to me on the TNIV front how almost every language in the world is gendered, and so there's like this is a unique problem in some ways to the English language. Not entirely, but there's certainly some uniqueness because we just do not think in terms of gendered language. But if we're in any Romance language, we would absolutely. If we're in Hebrew or Greek, we would absolutely be thinking in terms of gendered language. Okay, so. Big level questions. Confirm or deny? This truism that if the Bible were on the New York Times best-selling list, it would be number one every week. Is that true?
Well, what is true is that, let's see, who was the it was Gallup. Gallup started measuring both Bible reading and Bible sales as a comparative study back in 1985. And this was actually something that, when I became the Bible publisher, that prompted me to, and actually really kind of messed with my conscience, was that Bible sales were skyrocketing. And at that time, the average household in North America owned 4.5 Bibles. This is households in the aggregate. Christian households owned more than that, especially if you threw in like Bible storybooks and stuff. But
there's just the average American household, regardless of religion, would have.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
But then, okay, wow.
Looking at the Bible reading scales and the stats for that, which we began to do under the tutelage of a consultant that we had hired to come in and help us think realistically about what was going on. Because as he said, you guys will never get to the truth because you're so busy patting yourselves on the back for being, for the number of Bibles that you sell. But what we discovered was that Bible reading was truly in free fall. And that really has not changed since 1985. So you have two divergent lines, right? You have access, and then you have actual reading. But it is true, and I don't know that I could say this definitively, like every single year, but on average in North America, we still sell 25 million Bibles. a year.
Gee.
And that doesn't count the number of Bibles that like Bible agencies like American Bible Society and others would give. So this actually came up in a story that I did. I think it was with The Atlantic, where they were, the writer, the journalist wanted to write a story on the Bible business, the profitability, and some of the same questions that you've asked. And so then I gave him that number of the 25 million and so forth. And he stopped in the interview and he says, if that's true, then I think that would mean that the Bible is not only the best-selling book of all times, it's the best-selling book every single year. And that's true. And, Bible publishers, and this was one of the things that started to bother my conscience. Vanity Bibles or niche Bibles, most publishers have learned to do that. And my team, when I first came, they said, here's the secret sauce. You create, a women's study Bible, and then you tweak the notes, and it becomes the women's devotional Bible. And then you tweak the notes again, and it becomes the busy mom's devotional Bible. And then you put an Italian duotone cover on it, that matches somebody's purse. And so now, and people flock to buy them. And so, and that was that when I saw the data about how many Bibles were sold, and then the Bible reading, I was having trouble sleeping at night. And I began to ask the question, is this what the Spirit had in mind when gifting us with the Scriptures? Even to the point of, do females need like a special set of notes or a special lens in order to read the Bible? And then you add to that, something that happens to every Bible publisher, the team, the editors, and then the design team that are working on the interior design. They design a page, and then it comes to your desk, and you look at it, and the way that page is laid out and designed is for your eye to be drawn to the notes, the prayers, the devotionals, and then the text is oftentimes like, squeegeed in there in 2 columns, small print.
Right.
And
It's almost
at one point, yes.
In the sense of the page of the Talmud, it's just the actual scripture is just there for reference, but you're supposed to read all the notes about it, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so those numbers led me to commission a survey. And so we gathered a lot of people who had bought our study Bibles or our, devotional Bibles. And we asked them a series of questions, including how much time did they spend reading the extra biblical material versus the text itself. And it was stunning how many people were just reading around the text. And at that point, I knew I had to do something.
So to conflate a lot of your personal history, this led you down a long road to joining with a team and an organization where you actually produced your own, I almost say version of the Bible, but Bible just means, Biblos just means book. You actually produced a series of books that capture all of Scripture called Immersed. Why don't you describe to us what the Immersed Bible is, physically and emotionally?
Mm-hmm. Well, the concepts behind Immersed came before we just got into a room and said, "Hey, let's come up with a cool, trendy new product," because it does come in 6 volumes. And this was part of the work that we did, with the consultant, who at that time was still, beating us royally. He at one point said, if you were doctors, I'd sue you for malpractice. He said,
Wow,
because
I
you're,
like this person.
yeah, yeah. He, he did not know what we call here West Michigan nice. uh, and,
He
but
sounds like a needed ointment.
he did us a world of good. But we ended up doing some research about the divergent trend lines, access skyrocketing, reading in free fall. And I took about 2 years meeting with scholars and Christian thought leaders and leading pastors to ask that question, what's causing this? And after a couple of years, we began a kind of a point of view began to emerge. And at one point, we then went public with it, that at that point, which is like around, 2004, 2005, we felt that there were three primary barriers. One was that people read the Bible in fragments. And, as one scholar said, you're soft pedaling at Paul. The modern church actually created an entire culture of Bible McNuggets and thought they were nutritious. You use the word microdosing, I think, in some of the articles that you've written. But one of the, what came out of that first barrier that we read the Bible in fragments came in time the understanding that people read in fragments because we fragmented the text, right? And, starting, I think, in the 12th century with Stephen Langton, Archbishop of Canterbury, who was writing Old Testament commentaries and was frustrated that people couldn't follow him. He was the one that was able to bring about the chapter system that we have today. There were others that had been involved in something else, but the really shocking change came in the 1600s when a French Huguenot scholar by the name of Robert Estienne came up with the idea of a resource that we know of today as a concordance. And as he thought through that, he realized, chapters are like zip codes, but that isn't going to help me identify words or phrases. I need street addresses. And so he came up with the idea of versifying the Bible. And it was he and he alone that came up with the idea. And he was a Huguenot and was on the run on his horse all the time. He actually did the verse system for the New Testament in a single week. And
Wow.
it stuck. And then, of course, the perfect storm was about the same time that the Gutenberg press was invented. And so for the first time in history, Bibles were made available to the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker. And so the first Bibles that they saw had chapters and verses, and the verse numbers were each indented so that they were like a separate paragraph, right? And there were other scholars at that time that screamed and hollered and said, you can't do that. If you change the form of something, you'll change the essence of it. And it was John Locke, the British philosopher, who said,
Really? Oh, of course.
the text. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The text is now so minced and chopped. And, if you see the spelling, it's like British spelling, that the average person, can only see the Bible as a series of separate aphorisms. And even the scholarly people today cannot tell the difference. And indeed that was true. It was like, an exoskeleton, a skeleton outside the body that was placed over the text. And in very quick order, then, it opened Pandora's box, and then people were piling other things onto the text. But specifically with the chapters and verses, it influenced everything about how we thought of the Bible, as Locke said, as individual standalone statements that we could take from any part of the Bible, something from a narrative text, something from a law text, something from wisdom, put them together, put them in a package in a bow, and because they all shared a word, then we would turn around and say, this is biblical. And this has been going on now for, the last 400 years. And, it's the modern Bible does us a lot of good, right? It helps on Sunday mornings when the pastor can tell you to turn to Joshua 2:4 or something like that. And I think it helps people in your field, right, to be able to reference, each other's work and argue with one another and things like that. But
isn't
I would say that,
Sorry, I want to come back to your but. That's your first indication, though. So in scholarship, when you're looking at Homer's Odyssey or Plato's dialogues or Socratic dialogues, because as scholars, you need to point at exact phrases and sentences. We have these very precise categorization systems. And the question is, do you really need that with Scripture? And what did people do before the system, right? You just had to say, oh, that part in John where he says, I'm the good shepherd, right? And that's a very different understanding of John's gospel than saying, okay, where in John's gospel does Jesus say is the good shepherd, right? Okay, sorry. So what was your big but there?
I'm trying to think of the scholar's name. Is it Jaroslav Pelikan, who wrote the Reformed Bible and the Bible of the Reformation? Yeah. He makes a strong point in that book that proof texting as we know it today did not exist before chapters and verses. Chapters and verses opened the door for that kind of thing. And it's the way we talk about the Bible in our study group. I believe this because 1 John 1:9 says this. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, somebody was arguing about something, and they said, well, that's a Matthew 14. Is it Matthew 14 or is it 17 that talks about, if you have some sort of beef with your neighbor, go to your neighbor.
Oh, 18.
But this person didn't even use that. They just threw out the chapter as though that covers it all, right? We're coming full circle now to your question about the Immersed Bible. Thank you. I'm glad to talk about that. But so when we sat in a room and we began to talk about a Bible that would promote bigger readings, a Bible that would allow people to read the Bible kind of like a narrative. And I don't just mean the narrative parts either. I mean, these numbers, they're like speed bumps on the superhighway, right? We may not even be aware of it. We read one and we hit a number and then we pause. And I think probably our mind pauses as well. So that was kind of a no-brainer. We were going to do that. And then we were going to do it in a single column so that we could represent Hebrew poetry as 2 lines instead of 4, 5, or 6 lines, which is what you get in a double column Bible. And then we decided that we were going to do our best to put the books in a better historical order. And, knowing that there were not going to be any perfect answers, but also knowing that, with the modern Bible, Paul's letters, I think I've read somewhere that at the time, when the printing press, when Gutenberg's printing press came, some decisions had to be made, right, about what that order was going to be, that we were going to have a standardized order. And so Paul's letters, unfortunately, are represented from longest to shortest. Romans being the longest, and then 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And so our New Testament, has 1st and 2nd Thessalonians that are first. And we did the same thing in the prophets. There's like 4 distinct periods within those prophetic books. And in the modern Bible, we do the big ones first and the little ones second. And there wasn't even an attempt to put them in a historic order. And one of the most fulfilling things then, Brew, is when people have started using the Immersed Bible, they come to us and said, "Oh, there are things that I saw that I never saw before, just in the course, of reading." A young college girl who had made a statement to her group. I think she was, we called her a pre-leaver, but she wanted to be in this group, which is kind of the second part of our value system, is that we're trying to pivot from a Bible study model to a book club model, because we believe that the Bible is a communal transformation book. But anyhow, this young lady was in one of those groups, and they'd read, we start out Messiah with Luke and Acts, and then Paul's letters in a better historical order. So they've read Luke and Acts, and they've read a little bit of Paul's writings. And she said, "I don't mean to be offensive, because this is all like brand new to me, but," she says, "I have to tell you, this Paul guy, I'm not much of a fan. He seems like a bully to me." And the guy the people that were leading that said it was an amazing conversation, that they had. But then they continued through Paul's letters in a better historic order, and obviously ended with Paul in prison. And she again, said, "I said I didn't like him. I liked him better at the end. He seemed to soften." And
Oh, wow.
that's a beautiful thing, right? And simply from reading in a different order. So
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's called the Immersed Bible. Again, it's a collection of 7 books.
I brought a set right
Hey,
here so that
there you
everyone
go.
can at
So
least,
for the YouTube watchers,
for Vanna White and anybody else out there.
yeah.
This Messiah is the New Testament. Beginnings is the Torah. Kingdoms is Samuel through the Kings. Prophets in a better historic order. Poets is wisdom literature and song lyrics, and we segmented them that way. And then Chronicles were the books that were written to Israel after the Babylonian captivity. So, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and we put Daniel in there as well. So that's Messiah, or that's Immersed, right?
Well, Paul, I think, and I have talked to you for hours and hours and hours before, and I feel like we could go on forever, but maybe we'll just have you on to talk again sometime. Thank you for your wisdom. Thanks for sharing the story, giving us the insider insights into what's going on behind our Bibles. My catchphrase coming out of this is, you didn't buy that Bible by yourself, right? like there's a whole machinery that gets that particular, like the Life Application Bible, into that person's hand of that color and that kind of cover, right? But despite all of that, there are actually really good ways to go about creating Bibles that are, what did you call it? Communal transformation books, right? I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. That's kind of our dream, that the new normal would be that people would kind of covenant together that we're all going to read the same thing for our morning devotions or whenever you read. But then once a week, we're going to come together, and the conversation will be around, more Socratic questions like what stood out to you in your reading this week, which really opens And when people start reading with that question in mind, they start paying attention to things that they normally wouldn't have, which I know you're a big fan of saying that just simply having the text and reading it, not through a lens of thinking, what's the theology behind this, but simply reading the text, that we can get a long way down the road.
Very long
just
way,
doing
especially in
that.
community.
Yeah. And Immersed will help you do that. So,
All right. There's the sales pitch. All right, Paul Caminiti, thanks for your wisdom.
yeah, Drew, thank you. You're a good friend, and thanks for this opportunity.
You've been listening to the Biblical Mind podcast, exploring the deep structures of Christian scripture. For more, visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org. Subscribe to this podcast at all the usual places so you never miss an episode.